My name is Benjamin Falter, and I'm the Director of Education at the Ontario County Historical Society. Today we are in our Pioneer Kitchen, where I'm going to show you how to make an old-fashioned tapered candle, perfect for adding a personalized touch to your Valentine's Day celebration. The method we're using to make candles today has been in use at least since 1820, perhaps even longer, though we do have some modern conveniences that make it faster and easier for us. There's several different items that you will need to make your own candles at home, and links to get all of that are down in the description below the video. You can also find most of the materials you need at your local craft store, so I would recommend supporting local if you can. But let's talk about what specifically you need. The first thing you need is wax. Now, wax for candle making, you have a couple different options. The first one I'm going to show you is soy wax. So soy wax comes in bags, usually 1 to 5 pounds, and can be found at most craft stores or online. Now, soy wax is very convenient. It comes in nice pellets, easy for pouring, easy for melting, but it's not very historically accurate. Most households around 1820 would have used leftover animal tallow, which is animal fat, and the candles that those materials produced were very smoky and they smelled really bad. Now obviously we don't want to use tallow today. Luckily, there is a historically accurate material that smells nice and is readily available. Beeswax. The beeswax I'm using today was provided by Hungry Bear Farms here in Canandaigua, New York. Beeswax was very expensive, so it would have been reserved mostly for the wealthy or for churches in 1820, but they were used to make candles at the time. So it's historically accurate and it already smells nice. But regardless of what you're using, whether it's soy wax or beeswax, you need to make sure you have enough. I would recommend getting at least 2 to 3 pounds of wax for your purposes today. The next thing you need are candle wicks. Now you can buy these in pre-cut lengths or in spools of candle wicks that you will then cut yourself. I am using pre-cut wicks today. I don't know if you can see this very well on the camera, but it's several inches long, 8 or 9 inches long, and it's got a little metal piece at the end. Now this metal piece could be used to fasten it to the bottom of a container, but it also works very well as a weight to keep our candle wick straight while we are dipping today. If you buy a spool of candle wicks, just note that you will also need to use something as a weight yourself. I would recommend washers or a nut that you can tie off at the end, again, to keep your candle wick straight while you are dipping it into the wax. The next thing you will need is a heat-safe container for melting your wax in. You probably want a metal can or jar or a mason jar. Both of those would work. Next up, you need a pot for water. So we're doing a double boiler setup today for our candles. So I've got my pot here, already pre-filled with water. And I've got some extra water off to the side in case I need to top off my pot at any point during this process. The next thing you'll want is a stirring utensil of some kind, a metal one preferably. I've got this long, thin metal spoon here. This is specifically for candle making, but you can also just use any long spoon or other metal utensil for stirring. You're not going to need to stir too frequently, but you will need to stir occasionally. You will also want things that you can use to cover your work surface. I am using paper towels over on my right, and underneath my hot pad I have laid a thick dishcloth just to keep my hot pad from touching this table directly. Other things that you'll need, I would recommend getting a metal or wood flat object, like a wooden spatula like I'm using here. And you're gonna clip or tie your wicks to this for the dipping process a little bit later. So you definitely want one of these. And 2 tall containers to rest it on. I've got these 2 glass ones here, and they're over my paper towel, so that I can rest it there between dips of my candles. You also need your stove top to heat your water over. I'm using a hot plate today. I also have a oven mitt, This is just in case I need to touch my container that I'm melting the wax in. Don't want to touch that with my bare hands because I'll burn myself. So make sure you have an oven mitt at hand, just in case. And lastly, I've got a pair of scissors here. You want a pair of scissors or a knife of some kind, because there's a couple steps in the process where you have to do some cutting. So make sure you have that stuff at hand too. But again, nothing super special or fancy. You should just be able to use whatever household implements you already have at hand. Now that we have all our supplies, let's start heating up our water. You'll want to start by having your water heating up to probably high, medium high, somewhere in that range. Once it's hot enough, we'll be putting our wax container in there to create a double boiler method and melt our wax down. So while we let our water heat up, let's get our wax in our container.
If you're using soy wax pellets, you'll go ahead and just start pouring them into the container for your wax. You want to fill it up pretty full. Also keep in mind that as your wax melts, it's going to take up less space in the container. So make sure you have enough soy wax set off to the side to top off your container throughout the process. But as I said previously, I am going to be using beeswax today. Now my beeswax came in a brick, and if your beeswax came in a brick, might I suggest you soften it up by heating it up a little bit before you try cutting it, and then put those pieces in your container just like you would the soy wax. Now that our water is heated up, we're going to go ahead and put our wax container in the pot to make our double boiler setup. A dipping double boiler setup like this would have been easy and accessible to most people in the 19th century. People making candles at home using this method, if they got really good, could make up to a dozen candles at once, assuming they had large enough pots and containers to accommodate that many candles. Now, as your wax melts down, you are going to want to stir it occasionally to make sure that it melts evenly and to break up any air bubbles that might be trapped in there.
Now that our wax is completely melted, let's turn the temperature down. I would suggest turning it down pretty much all the way to low. The reason for this is if the heat of the wax is too high while you're dipping your wicks, you're going to undo all the progress you've made because it'll just remelt the wax layers that you've already built up on your wicks. Now we need to let this cool off for a few minutes, so while we're doing that, let's prepare our wicks.
Now I'm using these pre-cut wicks. The first thing you'll do if you have a spool of wick is cut your lengths and then tie one end around a nut or a couple washers to weigh it down. Once you've done that, or if you're using pre-cut wicks like I am, you're going to attach them to your wooden spatula. I'm using binder clips, but if you have a spool of wick, just leave enough at the end to tie it off, and that should work out fine too. Now we want to make sure that our wicks are far enough apart from each other so that the candles don't stick to each other while we are dipping them in our wax. If they ever do get stuck to each other, you can use your metal utensil to separate them.
All right, our wax should have cooled off enough, so let's start dipping. You're going to take your wicks and you're going to slowly and smoothly dip them into your wax, and then slowly and smoothly pull them back out. I'm going to hold it here for a second to let excess wax drip off, and then I'm going to bring it over here and set it on top of my tall containers to let it air dry for about 30 seconds. I think enough time has passed now. Let's go ahead and do a second dip. Now you're going to want to keep doing this process back and forth until you get enough wax buildup to cut off the weights at the end, because enough wax will have built up on there to keep your wicks straight regardless. So I'll see you in a moment once my candle wicks are set enough for me to cut off the weights.
As you can see, we've made quite a bit of progress on our wax dipping. So we'll go ahead and cut off our ends and continue dipping. We're going to keep going until these candles are about 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch in diameter. If you have a candle holder already prepared for your candles, you can use that to determine when they're done. My candles are making some very good progress, as you can see. They shouldn't take too much longer to finish up. Now, just a couple of things to keep in mind while you're doing this. If you notice that the wax level in your container is starting to go down because you've built up so much wax on your candles themselves, then you may want to pour some more wax into your container, turn the heat back up to fully melt it. Once it's fully melted, let it cool back down before resuming dipping your candles. Now, the agitation of your candles getting inserted into the wax and then pulled back out fairly frequently should prevent your wax from hardening up at this cooler temperature, but you may notice that it is starting to get too cool and harden back up. So if you notice that happening, again, turn the heat back up, melt it completely, then turn it back down before resuming dipping your candles. That should do it, I think. My candles are pretty much done. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now, I'm not gonna light this candle right away. I'm gonna leave it overnight to set before I try lighting it. So I'm gonna set this off to the side as well. Now, if your candles are a little lumpy, don't worry about it. It adds a little bit of authenticity to the whole process. Once I started dipping my candle, it took about an hour to finish it up. But keep in mind that you'll also have to budget enough time to fully melt down your wax. The amount of time that takes can vary based off of the size of the pot that you're using and the size of the container that you're putting your wax in. So plan this whole process to take you about 2 or 3 hours, all things considered. So in terms of cleanup for your candle project, obviously leave your candles on some paper towels lying on their side or hanging up over it. Either way is fine, to let them dry overnight before you try lighting them. I'm just gonna let this dry because I can always remelt this wax and use it the next time I'm making candles. But that being said, if you do not want to have this container just be your candle container, moving forward, at this point pour it into another container that you don't mind keeping wax in the future, or at this point you pour this into another container that you will dispose of if you don't want to keep the wax. But I'd recommend keeping it because candle making is a fun little project. Now with my pot, I'm gonna let the water cool off so that the wax in it solidifies, and then it'll be easier for me to scrape it out and dispose of it in the garbage can. I want to do that before I dump the water, and then I will clean the pot as well. The reason why I don't want to dump any wax down the drain is that the wax may be liquid when you first pour it down the drain, but when it hardens, it can cause a major problem with your client. So do not pour wax down the drain. Let it harden a little bit, and then you can scoop it out with a spoon or something like that and dispose of the wax. Then pour your water down the drain and wash your pot. So we let our candles set overnight. So now it's time to test them and make sure that they work. First thing we need to do is, of course, trim our wicks. You do not want a wick that is this long. You want your wick to be about 1/4 of an inch longer than your candle is tall, at most 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just gonna take this pair of scissors and cut off the end of the wick there. Perfect. All right, now I'm gonna put it in my candle holder. You may need to square off the bottom of your candle before you put it in the candle holder as well. It might be a little too rounded to fit in there nicely, so just use a knife to make a nice square bottom before you put it in the candle holder. Now, the candle holder I'm using today is this one right here. This is part of the Pioneer Kitchen, and it's sort of an old-fashioned lantern-style candle holder. It's got a handle on top,
so I could carry my candle around the house at night if I was trying to find my way around. And now for the moment of truth. Oh. That's perfect. And that's it. This is how you would make a candle in the 19th century. We did take advantage of a couple of modern conveniences, but the process that we used would look remarkably familiar to our ancestors back in the 1820s. So that's everything. I hope you enjoyed this candle making video and learned a little bit about our history. And if you want to visit us at the Ontario County Historical Society, we're located at 55 North Main Street in Canandaigua, New York. I've been Ben, and we hope to see you again soon.